Hey guys, I'm back today with another video for you. I am doing an easy one-layered background. I've got some tips on how to make that background, tips on ways to create dimension even in a one-layer card, and I hope that you'll enjoy it. This is the card that we're making today. You can see it. And I will show you some cool tricks and tips. I want you to make sure you hit the subscribe button if you hadn't done that yet, and I will link everything that I use in this in the description below, so make sure you click through those links anytime you're going shopping. That little bit of commission really helps me run this channel, and I appreciate it so much. So I hope you like this video. See what you think. Okay, let's get started with our supplies. First is full sticky Post-it notes. They're sticky all the way on the back, and then I have some letters from my favorite things that I'm going to use in the middle of this, and then I have an embossing folder. And when you look at the final card, you may think that doesn't look like it's embossed, but I'm just going to use this as a way to make the pattern so that I don't have to come up with the balloon pattern on my own. Let's start by making our mask out of the letters. I'm going to take two pieces of this paper and I'm going to put the sticky side up. The reason I'm doing two pieces is because it's definitely going to get stuck to this cutting plate when it goes through my Gemini. And I feel like that tends to make it a little less sticky, which makes it harder to work with. So that way I have two layers of these stickers. These are going to have to be very sticky to stick to what I need them to do, and I'm also going to use the outlines of the letters later on in the process, so you want to keep every piece that you can. And if you're worried that your letters aren't going to stay in place and cut the right area of these Post-it notes, you can tape them down. I don't think this is necessary because you know that your Post-it note is about to stick to your top plate. So as long as you just look through that plate and you make sure it's covering your letters, you should be fine. So now we need to make our mask for the balloons that we're going to use on this background. So we got three different shapes of balloons. I put these in my Misty in the corner and I left them on the pad of Post-it notes so that they're not sticking to the Misty. Then I take one sheet off and get ready to do my star balloon. When we cut these out, one of the important things to remember is to cut along the inside edge of this because when you're stamping it down, you're not going to get all the way to the edge every time you stamp. So you want to go inside the lines, and I go just barely. This still sometimes leaves a little bit of space in between my images, but you can fill that in with a little bit of a paintbrush and some ink. You want to keep any extra parts. So this star that I cut out has another space that something else could be made from. So I just stick that right back on my pad and use it again. Next, we're going to make a very small impression of this embossing folder. So you could take this and do a full impression. I just wanted to get a little bit of the pattern on it so that I could see when I was laying my stamps down how I wanted to stamp. So I put it in and lined it up to where it was an even pattern, and then I'm going to put it through my Gemini. Just use the bottom two plates of my Gemini, one piece of cardstock, and then the embossing folder, and that just made a very, very light impression on this so that I could see it when I was stamping. One tricky thing about trying to put a word on the center of a card is lining it up. And normally I would pick up those letters with a piece of sticky tape, but these letters are sticky on the back. So that was not working. I tried to do that and it just wouldn't come off of the surface and let me pick it up. So instead I decided I would get my T-ruler out and just try to line these up by looking at it and using the measurements on the T-ruler. I'm not gonna lie, that takes some time. It probably took more time than anything else I did on this card to get these lined up, centered, and also when you're sticking sticky letters down to a piece of cardstock, you need to make sure that they go down straight because they want to lean to the side. And so I'm just a little bit of a perfectionist, so this took me a very long time. I do want you to notice that you can see a little bit of that impression in the back of that card. That's what I'm going to use to make my pattern exactly like the embossing folder. So when I'm lining this up, the way I like to do it is to look at the middle of my middle letter of a word. I feel like I tend to do a better job at my spacing if I start in the middle of a word. So with happy, I was lucky that there were 5 letters and I could go in the middle of that P, and then I can line things up together after that. And I felt like that works out a little bit better. One thing I learned on this is that I should have taped my piece of paper down to the MISTI. I'm using the grid lines of the MISTI to help me line things up, but I keep moving my paper because these sticky letters get stuck to the paper, and then you take them off and then it moves your paper. So I really should have stuck it down with a piece of tape, and if I do this again, I will definitely do that. So once I have these lined up, what's nice about using the Post-it note pads is that you can remove these and lay them down differently. I fool with it a lot to try to make it look even, and the sticky part of that stayed sticky the whole time, even with my fingers touching it. But if I ever have a little area that's wanting to stick up, I will use my tape runner on it, and that works perfectly. But you want all of your edges, and I even go through and press all these edges down. You want them definitely pressed down well so that when you stamp over it, that ink is not leaking under where you're trying to mask. So you could do lots of different color combinations with this. I have a pack of 4 matching colors from Altenew's crisp ink line that they go from a very light to a dark, and I thought that would be really cool to make an ombre effect with these balloons. I always feel like one layer cards need something extra to make them stand out, and I think doing something like this ombre is a really cool idea. So with this balloon right here, I have a little part that's not sticking down and a little part that was still showing the pink on the edge, so I clipped that off, and now I'm going to mask that while I stamp my blue star over the top of it. Can you see the little white line where the stamp and the ink doesn't get quite to the Y? I'm going to stamp it one more time to see if I could help make that a little bit better. And then I'm going to show you what I did with a paintbrush to try to go in and kind of fill in that little area. You don't necessarily have to do this, but if you want a more seamless look, adding some color right through here so that you don't have that starch white line from your mask is nice. So I did that on all of my stars that didn't stamp all the way. And here's what that star looks like after filling in that white line next to the Y. I think it looks awesome. So just a teeny paintbrush, a little bit of water on it just to get it wet, and then I dry it off with a piece of paper towel, and I add some of the ink color that I'm using and just barely dab it on until you get the look that you want. Now with this layer, I had done 2 layers of that star by the Y because I thought that might fill in my gap, and when it didn't, I realized that my other colors in this layer, that using this ocean waves, I'd only stamped once. So I decided I'd go back and stamp both of those with an extra layer and make sure I did a good job coloring in the sides. I'm going to finish out all of the balloon stamping with a little music here so you can watch the rest of it. Now I'm going to take my mask for these letters off slowly, easily, so that you're careful. One thing I've noticed, and I would say make sure you do, is when you peel them off, sometimes the Post-it note paper is a little bit less absorbent than your regular Bristol Smooth, which I'm using here, and you will get some of this blue ink on your skin, and so you want to make sure that you're not getting fingerprints in your places where you've got these open white spaces. Now, if you wanted to just leave the white spaces, then you need to fill in your balloons more in the background so you can read it. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to fill in the actual word happy. So you wanted to keep the reverse of your letters. That's what I'm doing right here, is sticking these back down, because what I wanted to do was to ink blend in these openings with the colors that coordinate, but also kind of make the ink blending darker on the edge and lighter in the middle, just to give it a little bit more interest. So I'm going to do that, and you need your negative mask to do this. You also need a very small blending brush. So I'm going to use Desert Night, which is the darkest of these colors, and you can see how my H is wanting to pop up there, so you really need to make sure you rub it down because you're about to blend over this. So I take the larger of the blending brushes, and I ended up just deciding to use mainly this one. Occasionally I would put a little bit of ink from the other one if I really need to darken it. But I put it on here, and I'm going to make the top of the H and the bottom of the H darker than the center of the H. And so I just did some ink blending. Altenew's inks do blend. I think you should probably use some type of Bristol Smooth, and you need to make sure you go over this a few times. It kind of reminds me of the Distress inks and how they blend. You can make little marks on them if you're not careful, but it does, if you continue at it, really blend quite well. So I'm going to do this on the H, and then I'm going to do this for each additional letter. So I'm using my dark one, my little teeny tiny brush, just to add some darkness and decide, maybe I'll just stick with this little bit bigger brush. And with these brushes, with the Altenew inks, I use the brushes that I use for Distress ink, not for Distress oxide. This is a similar ink to Distress ink, and it is fine to use those same brushes. So I'm using my brushes that I use with my Distress inks to do this blending. I work on these letters for quite some time, so I'm going to keep on showing you a couple things, but I also want to show you what it looks like when I pull this off so that you can see what I'm trying to achieve. And then after I've got all my letters done, I am going to, you could leave it that way, perfectly fine. You can read the happy, it looks good. But I decided that I wanted to add one more element. And so what I did was add glossy accents on top of this. So I'll show you how that looks. Up a couple of these pictures so you can see the glossy accents. I did add a die cut of the word birthday in holographic cardstock. I thought that looked really cool and used some of these little bubble details. I will link everything in the description that I used in this video. Please go through those links if you're going shopping today. That will help me out so much. And make sure you hit the subscribe, like, and notification button, and I hope to see you back again soon for some more fun videos. Thanks, guys.